Welcome, everybody, to the 41st episode of the ABT Time podcast. And today is going to be kind of the second installment on this topic of teaching the ABT, teaching the ABT part 2. So we last year did a first installment that I think has been our most popular episode to date. We had 3 or 4 different people who've been using the ABT in undergraduate courses. Now we've got another group of 4 speakers here that are also doing it. I'll introduce them in about 5 minutes or so. Let me jump into a little business here before we get going, updating you on what's been happening in ABT land. This is the next big event. This is a flyer we're working on. We'll send out right after 4th of July when we finish tweaking this. But the Narrative Gym, this is the grand fulfillment of the vision, which is that starting on August 2nd, we will start running these sessions every Thursday or Tuesday morning at 11 Pacific. And we have 4 partner groups for the month of August. And each week, it'll be a 90-minute session in which 2 of the groups will offer up 1 presenter each. That presenter will give a 3-minute talk with 3 slides. And then we'll have probably 25 or so builders who are people from the 4 partner groups who have done the course, know the basic ABT tools, and we'll set to work on a moderated discussion that either Matt or I will lead for about a half an hour, where we go through the 5 main things. What was the question? What's the ordinary world? What's at stake? What's the conversational ABT? And what's the Dobzhansky? And really start to develop this. We've been doing this for 2 months with Pfizer internally, and it's working great. It's just an hour-and-a-half session to activate the narrative part of your brain, and you do it week after week, and you begin to pick these things up at the intuitive level. So that is the grand vision coming true. We'll keep you posted on that. One little thing I just want to discuss here for just a couple minutes, not get too carried away on this, but yesterday I appeared on a podcast. No need to even talk about specifically whose podcast it was. Several of the people in our ABT group were kind enough to tune in. This person had probably, I think, a couple hundred commenters going on. It was a live podcast that ended up stretching almost 2 hours. It was in response to this article I had on Sunday in MedPage Today titled "How to Control the Information Fire Hose of the Pandemic. Government Agencies Need to Hire a Narrative Officer." And Julie and Doug, do you want to join me for just a couple minutes of chit chat about this? And we will do a brief postmortem on, I'll give you my take on it, and then the 2 of you can tell me what you heard listening for even just a few minutes. But it was a good experience, basically, because it made me realize we're dealing with 2 audiences out there. We're dealing with a content audience and a form audience. The form audience is who we want to be talking to, the people that are interested in this whole thing that we're working on, which is narrative shape and form, and ABT versus and. And that's what the whole message of this article was about. If you actually read the article, it was about how you need this one individual in your organization who understands the ABT form structure and could come in and apply that to your information flow, so that you're starting to send things out that have got the basic setup, problem, solution dynamic to it. And you can become more efficient with your information sharing, as opposed to just spewing everything out in and mode. That's as much as what the article was about. Well, it turns out there's this content audience that locked onto that term in the subtitle, narrative officer, and basically felt this was evil. That they really, I think the word we forgot to bring in there was Orwellian. I think they all felt that this was an Orwellian thing I was advocating, that you need to have this minister of the truth, who is the person that hands out the truth, and it needs to be these government agencies. And oh man, the level of paranoia and anti-government sentiment, it was just kind of intense. And then Park Howell was on the entire time and followed all the comments in the chat room, and just back and forth. And the crazy thing he said was the people commenting couldn't decide if I was right wing or left wing, when in fact I think everything I said was kind of no wing, but they were all trying to figure out, what's this guy's agenda? What's he trying to do with us? So Julie, did you pick up any signal in listening to this 2 hours of craziness?
Well, the ironic thing is that they're talking about controlling the narrative, but I felt like they were trying to control your narrative. You kept trying to bring up the point of it was not controlling or limiting truth or limiting information. And she just kept going back to that. And
I know.
Any inability to step back and say, okay, maybe I need to think about this a little differently. And the audience just kept going to learn. Oy.
Literally, after 2 hours, she kept saying, well, I just want to go back to this narrative officer thing and the truth. And in the beginning, I said, let's not even talk about the truth. The truth went out the window with Colbert when he started making fun of it with truthiness. And it's too relevant of a term, relative of a term. Oh God, on and on, back and forth, back and forth. Doug, did you have any thoughts?
Well, my thought was they clearly came in with an agenda, which was to hype up the Orwellian thing. I believe that the podcast host knew exactly the distinction between content and form, but that wasn't her narrative for the day because she wants to entertain and she wants to rile people up. And so they zero in on this. I 100% got the Orwellian thing. And, content was the killer there. They wanted to basically, they weren't hearing anything you were saying. They wanted to believe that this is a way to manipulate and lie to people. And, we know better. And I think the takeaway is, first of all, these folks, our typical audience are ones that come hungry to learn, and they're a growth mindset, and they're there because they want to be better at whatever they're doing. This was not that audience. They're there for controversy. They're there to be pissed off. And so she gave them all the red meat that they needed to. And, I think, but the funny thing is you're not proposing anything radical with a narrative officer. It's just the language that we use. Every company, every agency, public has a PIO, public information officer. It's as old as time. All you're saying is they need to be better at narrative, period.
That's right. That's right.
So,
Yeah, no, exactly. And for years, I've talked about story phobia and say, let's avoid the word story because there's so much baggage attached to it. Now, all of a sudden, after yesterday, I'm thinking, God, there's a lot of baggage nowadays with narrative. It was tapping into so much paranoia. And you got the feeling that most of them were like, we know we're being lied to and we're being told a narrative. They kept wanting to use that word narrative over and over again. I defined it at the beginning the way we use it structurally, and they didn't care about that. Well, we've got our own way to do it. Whatever. I was all crazy, but it was interesting to do. And then if you want a sample of those voices, just go to the article itself there on MedPage, and there's 14 comments on it, and they're all the same types of people. Then not a single comment is about the article. They're all about that one word narrative, or that term narrative officer, and all the paranoia. Oh, well, welcome to today's world. It was a good little sample of that. All right. Thanks, you guys. We got to get on with today's agenda, which is teaching the ABT. And here's what we're going to do. Try and keep this to about an hour, even though we could go on for several hours. But this is really great. What we're doing now is none of us have a big NSF grant to develop a curriculum for the ABT. I don't have the time to write a proposal like that, any of those sorts of things. We're too busy actually doing this stuff out there, running the course nonstop. We're booked through the fall, and we've got a waiting list now in the spring. So we know how powerful the ABT framework is. It's being proven just by the popularity of it through zero advertising. Nobody in the media has written up anything about it. They don't seem to get how powerful this is. But on the side, we're accumulating this group mass of knowledge of people that are using it. And eventually, I think a couple members of our group are going to eventually work on trying to pull that together and maybe doing another narrative gym book in relation to the teaching of using the ABT in teaching. And so for today, we've got 4 great individuals who have been using it for the last few years. And each one of them I'll ask to come on and talk about 5 to 10 minutes, whatever feels right for you. If I'll start to kind of semi cut you off if we get close to 10 minutes, because I want to get plenty of time for everybody, and then discussion with all the other folks that are joining us for talking about it. And so let's just get the ball rolling. And, rather than me reading lengthy introductions, we'll kind of semi-introduce each one of you. This episode kind of got initiated by Alan Crivellaro. Is that the pronunciation? Alan, you want to join me? Cambridge University, your plant scientist, you got in touch about 3 weeks ago and sent me this little booklet that you've published, how you're using, what's it for, science communication and writing, but then you've got a big chunk in there about the ABT. So Alan, you want to take it away on that note?
Sure. Well, nice to meet you all. It's really a pleasure to be here, first of all. Yes, teaching the ABT. I've been using the ABT since I met you, Randy, through your books and through the courses I did.
Thanks. And you're at Cambridge University?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, okay.
Cambridge, UK. My 5 minutes are going to be about how to use ABT in presentation and in teaching, of course, mostly. I tell you how everything started. 2020, we all know the pandemic started. Everything moved online. Everything got so boring on my side. These AAA presentations, these lists of things going on through our screens and computers and into our mind, and then right out of our minds immediately afterwards. So I said, I have to do something here. And this is why I set up this Presenting Scientist initiative. I have been teaching postdocs and PhDs how to deliver good presentations for many years, but then I decided to formalize it a little bit more. And I wanted to spread my voice, to teach more and more of these young students how to design an effective presentation. And then I set up a workshop, which I deliver online or in person. And when we discuss the definition of an effective presentation, we say always, we end up saying, well, an effective presentation is the one that delivers a message, which is the basic of communication, of course. And what better way to deliver a message than the ABT? So what I suggest in my very little 30 pages book is to use the ABT to structure.
Okay, hang on, and put that up to the screen there. Let's take a close look at your title there on the book, and how can people get a copy of that?
So, effective scientific presentations, the winning formula, because many people following my classes are getting prizes for their presentations, and you can get them on Amazon.
Okay, can you push that even closer up to the screen, the camera, so we can see the title? Yeah, great, effective science presentations. Okay, cool. We'll have the link to it on the website. Thanks. Great.
Well, so effective presentation, we need to deliver a message. I strongly suggest to start every scientific presentation with a message shaped according to the ABT, because as I said, this is probably the best way to deliver it. And then to structure this presentation all the way through, again, following the ABT. So the first bit before the end needs to be explained a little bit more. So we provide introduction there, then we have the end connection with the next bit, with importance, why is the topic important, and why people should keep listening to that. But we also need to underline a problem, and this is what we do next in our presentation. And therefore, we present our material methods and the results, always keeping this problem solution dynamic all the way through the presentation. And then at the end, of course, we want to live with a message, and again, ABT structure comes in order to deliver effectively the message. So with this structure of a scientific presentation, you are basically delivering your message 3 times. Once at the very beginning, short way, then you explain full length, all of it. And then again, very short way.
That is excellent. Something I'm going to try and lobby you on this fall. We're going to be running, I think, about 4 rounds of the course, all simultaneously. We're going to stretch it this time, only meeting 1 hour a week for each one. And I wonder if there might end up being one of those that you could audit and sit in, and it'd be great for you to hear, because we keep, Matt and I in particular, and then the 20 people associated with the course, we keep hitting new realizations of elements of the ABT. We've got to the point now where we've got 2 levels. We've got the primary and but therefore, and then we've got this secondary level of all these specifics of the ordinary world and what's at stake, and the if then clause and the but because and all those sorts of things we're adding on. It's like we're building this sculpture that, we started off broad and simple, and now we're getting into the detail work. And so none of that's in the narrative gym book, or bits of it are, but not all of it. But it'd be really great to have you soak in the whole course where it is now, and then eventually, maybe if you do a next edition of that book, then be able to add more of those things in there. That's really, really great. Thank you so much for doing that. And this is, we're crowdsourcing the teaching of ABT. None of us have the time ourselves to do it one individual, but out of this group, eventually, I think we're going to have this kind of crowd knowledge that these episodes will be putting together. So, okay, thanks. Let's go on to our next speaker, and then we'll come back as a group and get into more specifics. Tracy Ford at SUNY Genesee in upstate New York, who's actually in the English program there. And you and I met probably 6 or 7 years ago. Tracy, you want to join us? And let's see. You first contacted me probably 7 or 8 years ago, and then I've imposed on you to write a few Amazon reviews and things. So I'm deeply indebted to you for that. Tell us about when you first encountered what you do there at SUNY Genesee. And came across
I actually, in response to your "Who are you? How did we meet?" document, I called up.
Tell me you put together an ABT.
I put together. I'm sorry.
Nice.
But as you say, I teach English here. Teach literature if they run them anymore, but primarily composition classes. I've been teaching composition classes for just shy of 30 years now. I was trained in literary analysis, and then specifically as a writing teacher for first and second year college students. And spoiler alert, the first and second year college students of 30 years ago are not the same as they are today. Which makes this ABT proposition a little bit more difficult, but still worthwhile. The first encounter with ABT, actually, I might call my first encounter was with proto ABT or ABT, if you prefer.
Sure.
I first learned about you as you were taking flock of dodos around the states. You came to Buff State, and
yes.
on November 3rd, 2006, Friday, November 3rd, 2006.
Hosted by my friends Howie Lasker and Mary Alice Kaufroth. Wonderful visit. Yes.
Yeah.
Wait, were you at that screening where the video system shut down in the auditorium for 20 minutes?
Oh no, this was smooth.
Oh no, it was at SUNY Buffalo that we had that. It was a debacle. Okay. No, their whole thing shut down. But anyhow,
this was completely smooth, and I was so impressed that I bought this copy of the movie as soon as it was available, and I had been using it in a class which came to be called Composition in the Social and Natural Sciences. It's a second semester writing course. I'd been using this for since that moment, probably early 2007. And then when the paperback of Houston came out, I had a couple of glasses of birthday wine. I had requested a copy for my birthday, and we folks who teach writing just love to write. So I fired off an email to your production company, assuming that I'd get a "that's nice" response for my fanboy presentation from some intern. What I got was an email the next day from you saying, "Hey, let's talk about it," and that became
That's exactly what I was talking about last week. All these poor people that innocently write in, expecting to talk to some great big edifice, and then here's loser me sitting by myself. I'm bored. Come on, call me up. Okay.
It turned into a conference call. I think Jade was on from New York, and you were in bumper to bumper traffic on the 405. And from that moment on, I've essentially been trying to spread the gospel of ABT, if you will. And, in terms of how I use it in the question, how do you use it in your teaching? And I think that's a good question. The answer is clumsily. You've mentioned a number of times in the things I've watched, and you were hinting at it earlier, that ABT is a hard sell for people who don't have a problem.
Yes.
Right. You've got to have a reason to be communicating. And for freshmen and even sophomore students who don't have a lot of experience with the world and really only see writing from the lens, well, it's hoops and hurdles. It's things they've done to pass a class. And unfortunately, even my colleagues think that, well, once you take your composition class on your freshman year, you must know how to write. And I can attest that most of my colleagues don't know how to write. So I'm struggling to get these kids to understand that writing is more than an exercise. Communication is an idea to a specific audience in the package that delivers it best. Which, I think that's ABT.
Yeah, we need to formalize. So did you get a chance to listen to that episode we did last year on teaching the ABT?
You got about half of it, yeah.
Okay, and we got into that there, which is that this stuff, ABT is a little bit more advanced. It doesn't really work for first year, even, you got to use it judiciously for young students. And they're somewhere around, mid-20s where they've got enough life experience. They've begun to accumulate some problems and some frustration. That's when it becomes golden, I think. Yeah.
My take on it then becomes, so good writers aren't good writers unless they're good readers. And so my goal is to get them aware of what is an AAA and what is an ABT. Yeah. And so this is, in fact, where I continue to use your movie, and I put it side by side with, don't cringe too much, Randy. I put it side by side with Judgment Day. Intelligence.
That's good. Yeah, that was a good movie. Yes, exactly. That's a really good movie to partner it with. Exactly. Because he got into a lot more specifics than we did with Dodos. Yeah.
Yes, and there's a lot more AAA in it than there is ABT. And so
yeah,
my proposition is getting students aware that there are structures that are worth communicating in. In fact, in listening to your last year's podcast, that's what I heard, that, you know, you were surprised to find that the young people, given in theory their depth of media and story experience, weren't, you know, they didn't have those problems.
Exactly.
They don't understand that there are structures.
That's so, exactly right. Yeah.
So that's my approach. You know, I tilt at windmills, but I'm going to score a hit someday.
Okay. Excellent. Let's move on to our third speaker, and then we'll turn it into group discussion. So Robert, there you are. And let's see, I met Robert back in 2010, I believe. We did a visit there to SUNY. Or sorry, to Syracuse University.
Not SUNY.
Not SUNY. Not SUNY. God, what a major faux pas. To Syracuse University, and we screened my movie Sizzle. Really a memorable screening there. And among many things, you remember we did it in the environmental and forestry program over there, and like 250 people, mostly graduate students. And by coincidence, Mark Morano, the great climate skeptic, happened to be on campus, and we went to dinner the night before. And there was an undergraduate there and said, yeah, there's this guy that's kind of a right-wing guy that's speaking tomorrow, and is Mark Morton or something. And I texted him and said, are you on campus? Yes. And spur of the moment, he came and joined our panel discussion after the film. And that was really a great night. And I remember one of the students there saying, you know, I disagree with, he got up to the microphone and said, talking to Morano, and said, I disagree with everything you have to say, but I want to thank you for being here, because we're in a bubble. We never get to listen to any of these other voices. We're told about these climate deniers, whatever, but you know, this is the first time we've ever heard one in person. It's so important for communication, at least to hear these people. So that was a great screening we had there. And then you and I have kept in touch. And then there's also the story of the greenhouse keeper there who accosted me at the end of my presentation. That's a whole separate story we have time to go into. But okay, so yeah, Robert, you've published this paper on using the ABT and teaching geography. Can you take it from there and give us a little bit of background?
Sure. So go a little bit back to when you were talking about how we met, Randy. So yeah, you did come out in 2010. And that was a time when I was young professor, assistant professor. I didn't have tenure, but was very concerned about the state of writing and geography and among academics more generally. And I knew that you had that interest, and you had written this book, Don't Be Such a Scientist. And we brought you out. And I think at that point, we were relatively in a simple place, that you were really good at identifying the problem. I also saw a lot of problems with academic writing in general, and writing in my field in particular, but I didn't necessarily have a solution yet. As you moved on through the years, you began developing the ABT. And right about the time you developed the ABT, I decided that, you know, I couldn't just kind of complain about the state of writing and geography. I needed to do something about it. And so around, I don't know, 2012 or something like that, I developed a course called Writing Geography for master's and PhD students. But I could really just call it Storytelling and Creative Nonfiction for Academics. And even though the course originally just attracted geographers, now the people in the course, just through word of mouth, are from history, from food studies, from engineering, from earth sciences. I now get a fair number of students that come from the business school, and it shows that there's this real hunger to improve their writing and to learn about storytelling. It's a semester-long class, and at the very early in the course, so in the first few weeks, we read some of Houston, We Need a Narrative, and they learn about the ABT. They begin to do exercises when they apply the ABT. So even though we read a lot of different things in the class, and we're not just like doing ABT week by week by week, it is really the foundation of the course, and it never really goes away. And so we'll come back to ABT later when we talk with the students. Well, how should you write an abstract or an introduction to a thesis or a paper? Like, I'm like, well, you should use the ABT. So use the ABT to help write your abstract or introduction. We also have a section where we talk about writing literature reviews. And for academics, this is a common thing that you have to do, whether you're in the sciences or the humanities. You need to review the state of the literature and talk about how your work fits into that. we use ABT to help them write the literature review and also connect this to a wonderful book that I know you're a big fan of, Randy, called They Say, I Say
Oh, yeah.
by Graff and Bergstein. And I think They Say, I Say and the ABT are deeply complementary.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And They Say, I Say is basically, in a nutshell, is that, they argue that all academic writing is argumentative writing. And we don't argue things in a vacuum. It's always in relation to something else. And so these groups of scholars say this, but I say this. So you're immediately putting that in contrast. And so if you see that They Say, I Say sort of template they propose and the ABT template you propose, they're very similar.
Yeah.
And so I tell my students,
and they are exactly. And the They Say, I Say is just the and and the but, and it's basically the agreement and contradiction. And Jerry and I, you probably know Jerry's in Flock of Dodos, right?
Yes. And it's funny. I don't remember that from seeing Flock of Dodos. And I only found out years later that you know him and that you're a fan of They Say, I Say. I discovered They Say, I Say on my own. And I think one of the reasons I was so attracted to that was my interest in storytelling and what I had seen with ABT. I was just like, this is in some ways a different way of expressing.
Well, and to that very point, one of my long-term agenda items is that when I give talks at universities that are cross-disciplinary, they have humanities and science students and faculty, and then I ask the audience, how many of you know this book, They Say, I Say? All the hands go up on one side that are all the humanities people, and not a single person in the science world has ever heard of that book. That needs to change someday. That They Say, I Say, it's sold, I think, close to 3 million copies now. It's one of the most popular textbooks in the history of college teaching. And then you go to the sciences, they know nothing about it, and they should, because it's so relevant to it. It underpins the whole MRAD template and everything.
Yeah, I mean, you need it to put your work. I mean, all scientists are making an argument in relation.
Well, there's a famous quote. Work. There's a famous quote about that I've never been able to find. I remember it was in a textbook long, long ago, and it was somebody famous. It might have been Ernst Mayr or somebody like that, evolutionist, who said all scientific research to be of any value needs to be argued for or against something.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it gives you something to push against. Yes. That's why. So I'm just saying what I want to say, my argument.
Yes.
You need to, if you have something to push off, it clarifies the writing and it makes it not just better, easy to read, but clear.
And if you think about
why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and if you think about the brain scans from Yuri Hassan that we're constantly citing, that's your MRI proof that argument activates people's brains. That's when it pulls them in as soon as you get that contradiction. So it's all very circular and kind of builds on itself. Okay, let's go on to our fourth presenter, and then we'll bring all of you guys back and do the group discussion with our other friends as well. Ange, I have known you, Andrew Petto at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and you and I met in, I think, 2013, where Brian Palermo, Dory Barton, and I were going around doing workshops from our Connection book. And we did one at University of Kansas. And I think we were tweeting about or something. And that was when we first connected with you. I know Dory was talking with you, and you were trying to figure out a way to introduce the ABT to the National Science Teachers Association, NSTA. And I think eventually kind of hit a brick wall with them. And I think, in retrospect, we can start to understand a little bit now why what we're finding out is that the ABT is not as easy of a sell with younger students as it is with the more advanced people and even the older folks. I mean, this is what we've got a bunch of senior faculty in our group of 20 folks who connected with it. There's a couple of guys, Mike Strauss and Rick Nelson, who are both retired from government agencies, and they have learned the ABT at such a deep level. And they've kind of defied the basic principle. There have been some older scientists I've tried to get them interested in, and then I just say to myself, well, old dogs can't learn new tricks. But then I look at those guys and myself and all of us, we're kind of getting up there. And there are just some people that really do light up on it, and they see it and they apply it to the retrospect of their whole careers. And then there's others where it's a brick wall. So anyhow, Ange, welcome. And how about give us a little background and how you came across the ABT?
Okay, well, first of all, we connected in 2005, not in 2013.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Memory
you
banks
submitted an article to the reports of the National Center of Science Education, 10 ways to have more effective science communication.
Oh, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah, we published that. And you had 11 in your list of 10. And the copy editor didn't like the fact that the title said 10. no sense of humor, right? But you came, you did a trip through, and we sat down with Rudy Strickler, and I can't remember who all was.
But that was 2013 with Rudy Strickler.
2013, right? And we sat down and talked with it, but it really struck a chord immediately, and I said, okay, how do we do this? How do we use this as a part of effective learning? And I took that young students thing by the horns, and I'm using it in introductory classes, modifying a particular exercise that I've used for a long time, which is a reflection. It's kind of a metacognitive thing, which is, what did I learn this week? And so what I started doing was structuring that. It's just 3 questions. So A, B, T. It's the what did I learn? And B, what's confusing me, what's conflicting, what's unanswered, and therefore, what am I going to do about it? And the first problem we had to solve was that students were really bad at the B. They were bad at identifying that conflict, and I love the conversation you just had with Robert. Right? Is how do you see that argument? How do you see the conflict, or how do you see the problem that you have? And so we've been working on that a lot in introductory classes. They're in biology. One of them is a bridge course between undergraduates and graduates in nursing, and the other is my introductory course for non-majors in human biology. Okay. And so we use the ABT that way, explicitly building that into the structure. And every week you got to write something, and it's got to be in the ABT. And I spend most of my time working with those young students, sort of critiquing that. Where you got what you've written in the B is a T, what you've written, in the A is a B, and so on, and kind of get them to form their thinking. So
do you have any written materials that you've created to use with that stuff you could share with us eventually?
Yeah, I can I'll be happy to send you that. It's just a little handout that says, do this.
Yeah.
And so cool. We do that, and it took me a while to get to the point where I was doing it comfortably. But I'm really happy with the results, not only because it gets students thinking that way, but also because it makes their thinking more visible to me.
That is incredibly cool. I love that application of it. Tell us what you learned this week. Then in the butt, tell us what you're confused on, where your problem is, and then tell us what you'd like. Yeah, that's excellent. So, you and I have not had any long talks in recent years. You've sent me updates from time to time, and then I've probably written you horrible things back about, well, we're finding out this doesn't work so good with undergraduates, and then you probably were trying to explain that to me, but I'm running around circles.
No, that's fine. And so that's with those younger students. The other thing I wanted to say was actually have taken 2 of the major assignments that are the functional equivalent of examinations in that human biology course, and they have to write a story. And so we give them your materials, we give them the YouTube videos, introduce them to that whole thing, and one of the things that I do is, you're a person trying to do a better job with your nutrition. And we take you through that, that narrative, and they have a template that sort of tells you what are the things that need to go in this narrative that was just really based off your original books on this. And then the last one we do for the course, the culminating one, is something we call Love and Death in Milwaukee, where they go to the cemetery. And we spend some time in the cemetery reviewing data. Students share their data, and then they pick a person in the context of that person's family in the cemetery, and they write that person's life story and try to give us the history of the community and the interaction of that person with the community based on, what little evidence they can collect. Wow. And now that because of the pandemic, we've been sending them to online cemetery databases. There's actually a lot more historical information in those online databases than actually walking through the cemetery. But that's actually more fun. It's more engaging. It's more different sensory input than just text.
And so then you have them use the ABT in shaping the story that they're telling of.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredibly cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Side note, tell Rudy I said howdy.
I will. Let me. Rudy's ritired now,
Okay.
believe it or not.
Right.
But one last thing is, I have used this in a more advanced class, in a graduate class at Quinnipiac University that I teach online, which is called Writing for the Sciences.
Mhm.
And so they do what I learned this week, but they also do they do the weekly reflections that we had before, but I've got them doing an online narrative gym, which is one of the things that I talked to you before. And one of the interesting things is getting them to go through their projects that they're going to write for this course.
Mhm.
But they are doing it as an ABT. Then they post it, and the other students respond to it. And then ideally, that first student takes that information and modifies it. I also respond to it. And so the idea is they're practicing not only doing this, but practicing critiquing it,
Mhm.
and then critiquing themselves.
Well, that is so good, because I've said from the beginning that the ABT, it does teach critical thinking type of
Right.
approach.
So that's the
Yeah.
idea we have there.
Yeah,
Finally, just to do it,
Yeah.
because these are biomedical sciences students, they're either graduate students or they're just about to become graduate students. I actually have them do activities where they grab an abstract.
Mhm.
And they pull the abstract, and I say, find me the ABT in the abstract.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
give them an example. I give them one of mine, and I say, okay, here's the ABT
Yeah.
in this abstract. And then I say, your next part of the assignment is to rewrite that abstract so the ABT is better.
Yep.
And I have done that to myself. So I said, here's mine. And, this was a co-authored paper. We had a lot of people, messing with it. But if I had to do it again, here's how I would write it.
And that's exactly what we did with the story circles training for 5 years. We used abstracts as the central unit for study. That is excellent. Okay, let's have everybody join back in now for a little group discussion here. You've met our 4 guests for today, and how's about if Julie Clausen from the course and Nancy Knowlton also from the course, 2 of you take the lead right now. And Julie, first, maybe you want to ask a question to somebody. I'm sure you've got plenty of questions to ask.
Yeah, because I do some communication training, of course, using the ABT as a foundation. But I guess my question for any of you is, what do you find the most challenging part, especially for younger students that are maybe limited in experience or have a hard time defining what the problem is for their ABT? What are the challenges for that you see?
Anybody jump in?
Well, I can jump in and just say, as I said before, the first problem we have is the B, is actually finding the problem, finding the conflict. Once they get that, the therefore is also, difficult. So their weekly reflections, what am I going to do about this? Oh, I'm going to go back and read the textbook. That's not.
Okay, so then let me ask you, out of our little model we developed in the narrative gym, so you then have them jump right into the B, bypass the A, and then
Oh no, I have them do the ABT.
Uh-huh.
But I'm saying where the problems we saw were in the B. They have problems identifying that problem. The conflict there. And then once they do that, once they succeed in that, which I'm happy to say most seem to do, the therefore, the resolution is still difficult for those undergraduates that I work with.
Yeah. Alan, have you got some thoughts on what Julie asked?
Yes, my answer to Julie's question would be also people struggle to find the problem, but also when they get it finally, they struggle to build a story around it. So this is the next step. So when they have a problem identified and they know the A, they know the T, what I tell them, now we have to frame a story around it, right? So we need to get out of this AAA model and stick into the ABT. And we are so, as a scientist, we are so into the introduction, material, method, results, discussion, structure, which is very boring and very AAA, that is difficult for them to get out of it and apply it in a real presentation on stage. And then they feel uncomfortable with that. So I really struggle with people and in telling them you have to build a story around your ABT, because it's one of the best ways to frame a story, actually, and use it, not just an exercise for you to understand your topic, but deliver it as a real scientific presentation.
Well, in 2013 was when I gave the first kind of big presentation of the ABT with the TED Med Talk. And much to my surprise, I told everybody, here's the end, here's the ABT. And I expected all the questions, people coming up to me, to be all about, oh my God, this ABT thing's so exciting. Most of the comments were people come up to me saying, I've been doing and all along, and I never knew there was anything wrong with it. There was something in the contradiction of pointing out the wrong way to do it. They were more drawn to that in the beginning than they were to the more, here's the solution, which is interesting. And that happens over and over again. And that's what there hasn't been somebody pointing out over the years that there's anything wrong with and. And I always say there's nothing wrong with it. It's just there's a little bit better way, a higher level to reach for. Nancy, you got a question for anybody?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, those courses sound wonderful. But as somebody said, usually somebody just takes it once and they've checked it off. I wonder what efforts were going on in your respective universities to sort of integrate effective use of narrative much more broadly. For example, in lab courses where people have to write lab reports, or when students are giving oral presentations, as part of a course on something completely different. To what extent do you have, buy-in from other faculty to sort of insert the, like product placement of insert the ABT in a wider variety of contexts? Because I think it might be even stickier if it were possible to do so.
Well, I could talk a little bit about my experience teaching kind of master's and PhD students in my class. I mean, in terms of, a larger engagement with narrative across the university, I mean, I don't know of any. I mean, we have a world-class creative writing program, but those are, people are going to go on and be famous kind of novelists or something like that. They're not going to be doing academic work. And I mean, I think working with students in the natural sciences, but certainly working with a lot of students in the social sciences and humanities, their main commitment is to various types of what we would call critical social theory, and they feel like they need to have their work embedded in that. And that becomes a framework to help kind of interpret phenomenon, but it can be very kind of anti-narrative. And so with me, in my class, I'm trying to show you don't need to ditch what you're doing, and everything you've learned in other classes about, say, social theory, but you need to, your work will be much stronger, much more resonant, and reach a wider audience if you engage with narrative. And really, it's kind of starting from the basics with them, because I find that most of my students, except maybe some of the historians that have been in my class, they don't really think in terms of narrative. And so I have to awaken that in them. And, I use the ABT and other methods to do that. But I don't think there's a widespread engagement across the university in that. And I think that's reflected in part. I mean, I mentioned that my class is called Writing Geography. I've never advertised it to other departments, but now I have a handful of geographers and students from all these other disciplines, because there's a real hunger for this, and they've found my course kind of like somebody drowning finds a life preserver in the ocean.
All of this, it needs to be set against the backdrop of a changing society, which the sciences and even academic world have not done a great job of changing along with society. And we're in this information era now where everything's flying by so rapidly, and the ABT is essential. And for example, in science, communication was not as important in the 60s and 70s as it is today. As we've gotten more information, it's harder than ever to get things right and get communicated. And my feeling in my little ideal world is that it's time for every intro science textbook to begin with a chapter on communication, which is that none of the science we're going to present to you here is going to be of any value to you down the road. You can't communicate eventually what you do. And that's a restructuring priorities. But I've talked about probably 5 or 6 years ago, I had lunch with my old buddy Joe Levine, the co-author of Miller and Levine, I think about the best-selling college intro textbook. And as I explained that to him, he said, nice idea, but how are you going to implement that? Because intro college textbooks have got 15 to 20 authors and they own their pages, and they're all built on marketing models. And the market tells them our textbook can only be 723 pages. Everybody owns every page. And the question is, who are you going to get to give up a page or two to write something on communication in place of their, chapter on mushrooms or whatever? And he just explained, it's vicious, the competition. You're taking money away from other authors if you want to put something in there on communication. These textbooks are not driven by ideal, let's educate ideally. They're the real world marketing model. So to affect change is very, very difficult. But that's okay. We're making progress with this. Anybody else got any thoughts on Nancy's question there? Tracy, did you have anything reaching broader?
I'm way back at the just out of high school end of this with students who talk about a changing society. 30 years ago in my writing training, we were decrying the use of the 5-paragraph essay because it was such a wooden form. It was so predictable, the paragraph at the beginning that tells the 3 things you're going to talk about, each paragraph of that 3 developed, then the closing paragraph, which sums up what you just said. I would die for a 5-paragraph essay now because
that's great.
There's no sense of form.
Yeah.
So my heavy lift here is that, and I was just on the Gen Ed committee as we were revising things. We're one of the few SUNY schools who requires 2 writing classes in the first year or first 2 years. And, they're marching on to the next 3 or 4 years with just an English 101 and 102. 102 is the composition in the social natural sciences. So I'm just trying to get them to understand that there is form and it is meaningful.
Oh, that is so interesting. Yeah, exactly. Because, one of the things we talk about nowadays is realization that, as we say, this 3-part structure was first identified in the 1700s. It's so far back. And yet in the past century, the whole culture got so massively layered and obfuscated, and even psychology and sociology have come in and hyper complicated everything to the point where simplifying things becomes insulting. Oh, you're talking down to us. Oh, you want us to use this little template thing. That's the bizarre thing. And now I come along with this, and all these people are so thankful. Finally we can find some structure in the storm. So that's just a huge cultural battle that we're in the thick of. Hey, Doug, while you're having a drink of water, did you want to ask questions, some folks?
Yeah. Couple of things that I love and that I routinely rely on are Dobzhansky and also the rule of replacement. So I was just kind of wondering if you
and by the way, one word of introduction for everybody in case you're not clear. Doug's our law guy and the co-author of the law book for the ABT. So sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So, and I teach lawyers and legal professionals narrative, and the idea of boiling our whole case, our whole argument down to that one thing is so hard, but it's so effective. And I was just wondering if anybody goes through that exercise with your students.
Yeah, I do that with my graduate class in scientific writing. They have a whole week on picking that one word that is going to describe that, and that was so powerful. Shortly after I met Randy, I got put on a thesis committee, a wonderfully bright student who couldn't find her topic with both hands in a paper sack. I mean, every time she read a new piece of literature, the thesis changed, right? And so I sat her down and I said, I want you to try this. Okay, go away and come back and bring me the one word that is going to be the condensation of what your main idea is, and then do an ABT on it. We had her do that and walked her through a couple of examples. And this is an older student, so this is a young woman in her early 30s, and all of a sudden, of course, everything clicked. because she was able to do that. So I do that with my graduate writing course. They actually have one exercise they spend a week on, which is, it's hard to do. I'm supposed to teach them everything about medical writing in 15 weeks. It's not going to happen, right? So we try to give them a taste, we give them a menu, we give them some things to follow. We teach them to take apart IMRAD and find the ABT in an article that's written in IMRAD, because that's what they have to write in their labs. And it's remarkably difficult, as you probably know, to get people to think that clearly. But it works. When they do it and they really work on it really hard, it works. So, yeah, I've done it.
Let me ask, Alan, do you I didn't see the Dobzhansky in your booklet. Have you got it in there?
No, it's not in there. I don't use it in my teaching. Mm-hmm. Maybe I might think to introduce you.
Yeah. Well, actually, on that note, Tracy, when we talk about the Dobzhansky and the ABT, the two tools that everybody we seem to be moving along this pathway, the last 2 years with the course, 25 iterations of the course, and bit by bit, Matt and I in particular have kind of begun to see these patterns emerge. And one of which is that now these are the two powerful tools, the ABT and the Dobzhansky. Tracy, does that ring any bells from traditional just creative writing and literature and everything?
Absolutely, it does. But again, I think the problem is the training that students are bringing in now is not the training I came in with. In fact, you talk about the Gerald Graff's book, The They Say, I Say. When I first encountered that, though I've never used it in a classroom, it was so obvious because that's the way I'd write my literary critiques. All of these important people say this, but I think this, therefore. It was natural.
Yeah.
But I was a decent writer coming out of high school, and my training had led me there. So when I get these students now who have been sent on all kinds of pathways of types of writing for the modern world, to speak to Dobzhansky, that requires your ability to see the one thing. It requires your ability to discern what's important. I have an exercise that I do with all of my writing classes. I've been doing it for almost 30 years. I read them a late 19th century version of Jack and the Beanstalk. It's unending. It takes 15 minutes. It's and. And then I say, all right, we go over, who did what. We just get the basics of the plot down and some of the characterizations of Jack and his mother and the giant. And then I say, all right, 100 words exactly. Give me this story. Distill this story into 100 words.
Yeah.
And then I leave the classroom for 5 minutes. And I come back and I say, all right, count your words. And they're all at 60, 70 words. And he's just selling the cow. And so I said, no. What's important here? I don't care about the color of the beans. Great. They were the colors of the rainbow. What's important in this story? So we have to start really, really basic just to get to Dobzhansky. And I mean, I have started to use that Dobzhansky formulation in late stages of especially the science writing course. I will say, and this goes to your point about what happens in the humanities, I also use narrative Jim in my writing in the humanities course, and it's an easy fit there because we start with Campbell's hero's journey. And so they already, by the time I'm talking about ABT, they already know what story means.
Yeah.
And it's also, that's a surprise to them as well. I mean, students always tell me after that class, wow, I see the pattern of story now whenever I watch a movie. But they didn't know it before. They just weren't aware that was an arc.
So what I was fishing for with you came up with one of the words, which is that just in the last 2 or 3 months, I finally hit this realization that these two fundamental tools of the Dobzhansky and the ABT, all they are is theme and plot. The same thing that for generations has been taught in creative writing. What we've gone and done is repackage those things in a little more analytical way, more practical way, but it's the same old thing. And Matt and I one day just had this conversation right in the middle of it. We realized, wait a second, we've got these fancy names. This is the same old thing. And there was one professor I had in film school who particularly there was a book by Lajos Egri, I think is a famous guy, on a playwright. And he was constantly bringing that up. And it basically said, no writing could be of any value if it doesn't have a theme to it. And so you can do all this stuff, but if you don't have that one word at the core, if you don't have a theme, what it is you're working, your stuff will never resonate, never stick with people. And that's why the Dobzhansky is so powerful. And when you hit on it, everybody, oh my God, there's the depth to it all. It's
May really, I ask?
Yeah.
A very, very important follow-up to Tracy. What is the Dobzhansky of Jack and the Beanstalk?
That particular Jack and the Beanstalk, I would say it's tough to find. That's why I choose that one. And then it leads us into a discussion of what should we, it's a very poorly written version, this late 19th, it's an and throws in a few little attempts at a moral. It's a really bad story. So I that's part of the discussion. What should we take away from this? What is meaningful here? So yeah, I think honestly, in most writing, you talk about finding theme in literary works, or any works. That's a tough thing, and generations of high school students have been told there's one theme to this poem by Tennyson. Yeah, no, it's far more complicated and sophisticated than that, and so it requires a lot of wading and a lot of parsing and a lot of return to an acknowledge. Is there a form here? Where is it lacking before I can go?
Yeah, that's all true. But these become decisions of how wide do you want this work to have impact in space and time? Yes. And if you're not worried about impact in space and time, then you can go and have the nuance, multiple themes and everything like that. But
but it's one of those things. It's about argument. It's about saying, and you could have multiple themes, but there is something in a carefully well-written thing that does stand out. And again, there's the Dobzhansky we're searching for, which is I always introduce this crazy little Venn diagram, what your English teacher thinks it means and what the author actually meant. And, they're widely disparate because English teachers are trying to pull out this depth of depression from blue curtains and whatnot. My point is, guys, it doesn't have to be that complicated, but we do need to understand that somebody writing has tried to put in some meaning, and hopefully you can find what that is. And you as a writer can do the same for the people who are a real audience, not some what I call the gray wall of teacher. Unfortunately, most students are trained, especially at my level, to write to the gray wall of teacher. It's not a real piece of communication. They know they're being judged. They know that it's a false thing they're doing just to prove that they can write. And they pass that on, leave it behind them, and then are sort of left scrambling because they don't realize writing is always about a thing through a vehicle to a specific audience for a purpose.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. You had mentioned in there, what's the meaningful thing that they could take away from it? Let's wrap this up here because I wanted to keep this pretty concise at just an hour. This is so packed with everybody's got major contributions. And as I said, this is an ongoing process. We're going to do another one of the installments. I keep, week after week, people are writing to me saying they're using the ABT, all these different courses. So to accumulate this knowledge is really great. So on that note, let's go in reverse order. Let's start with Ange, and let's have the four of you just give us a final little wrap up on maybe what you see going forward with using the ABT. Ange, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. And at this point, this is going to be in September, the second time through for the graduate scientific writing class. And so what I'm looking at in particular is the narrative gym exercises that we did and trying to really help students be more effective in critiquing their own ABT, also more effective in critiquing each other. And I get too many of these students that are saying, "Oh, that's wonderful. I just think that's so great," and it's good to be supportive of each other.
Well, hang on one second there. I've heard this before. Do you run into that as a problem of these young students just not wanting to say anything critical?
Well, these aren't all that young. I mean, these are
graduate
graduate students.
Yeah.
They're not my freshmen, but yes, partly it is. I think we need to get them more familiar with the whole concept and how it's applied. but we also need to get them to be willing to critique each other, and to critique each other in a way that's collegial and constructive, and not be afraid to say, I don't get it. You're trying to tell me something, but I'm not getting it.
Well, I had a very formative moment at the very beginning of Story Circles. We ran 4 prototype groups, and in one of them was with graduate students, and a woman presented her ABT, and I started in on the critique, the constructive ABT build that we do. And this other young graduate student jumped to her defense and began lecturing me and saying, in general, as a professor, when you critique people's work, you should begin by going through all the positive things, why this is so good. And I got ready to answer him. And the woman jumped in and said, if I want that kind of praise, I'll call my parents. I'm here to improve this thing, and let's get going. And ever since then, that's exactly what we do. The thing that's so good with the ABT framework is that it's just this very analytical. There's no gut feeling, and it just bored me, whatever. Everybody's required to actually analytically explain the reason I lost focus, because we lost the narrative. You didn't have, your contradiction cleared there. And that's where it's very, very good. We've run that course 25 times and just zillions of all these things, especially the Story Circles. There were never any personality complaints. That's what the whole process takes out of the equation, is personality, by having these analytical principles that you're working with. And that's really great. And I think that's a crucial part of teaching, is to be able to get them comfortable. This is not about, somebody being boring or interesting. It's about trying to work on these inert principles. So okay, doke. Well, that's great. Let's see. Next is Tracy. How about if you give us a few final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Where am I going from here? More meta, more of a deep dive into self-analysis, and that the thing you just said about it's not about beating you down because you did the wrong thing in your writing. Okay, you wrote this thing. It's not quite ABT yet. What if you changed it in this way? I've done away with your essay is an A and your essay is a B because it failed to meet. It's just, you wrote a thing. Now let's revise it in a particular direction. Not that the first thing was bad. Notice the difference between them.
Yeah.
We're moving in the ABT direction. So it's I'm more and more meta, writing about writing.
That's great. And, that's the label we put on the process in the course, is the ABT build. And I chose that word build because that's a more positive, constructive thing. We're going to take your thing and we're going to build it even better and make it, we're going to build back better on your ABT, basically. Okay. Let's see, Robert, wrap up thoughts here.
Yeah, as I said, I've used the ABT for years. And one of the things I've been encouraged to see is that you're writing these little books, co-authoring these little books on ABT for business, ABT for law, and ABT for other things. Now, I don't teach any law students. I do have some business students, but I think it's encouraged me to think about, how can we take aspects of the ABT and tailor it more for the interest, issues, and problems that people in other fields face. Because as I said, I get engineers, natural scientists, food studies, historians. And so thinking about ways that can we tailor this a little bit to the issues and problems that you have in your particular field, as opposed to just kind of the ABT in general.
Yeah. And that was exactly what emerged for us, was that I wrote that first book and Park Howell came along and said, nice book, but my business people aren't going to read it if it doesn't say business on the cover. And then we did the rewrite of the first and last chapters, and it's turned into a really effective formula to exactly diversify it out into different fields. And we hope to continue with some more of those, but that was just the first 4 installments. And Alan, the guy who catalyzed this entire discussion here by writing to me a month or so ago, you want to give us the final little wrap up thoughts on where you're headed with ABT stuff?
Yes, let's think about teaching for a moment. With teaching, I mean, what's going on in a classroom where there is a teacher and students. The worst thing that the teacher can do is to open a book and read it in front of the students. This is the worst thing, because there is no learning going on if this is the lesson, the lecture all the way through. Learning is something that goes on a different level. Now, let's think about the opposite. What can the opposite be? Well, we can bring the ABT in. We can have the teacher thinking about the one thing he or she wants to teach in the next 10 or 15 minutes. And then he provides a bit of introduction, A. but he or she states a problem and then leave the students to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And this is when learning is going to start and it's going to happen among students. And of course, the teacher is there to coach them to find a solution to the problem. But if we structure our lectures or our presentations in this way, we have this problem solution dynamic that goes on. It's not AAA. It's a very well structured, entertaining, and in terms of teaching, it's also providing learning experiences.
That's excellent. You're right. And that's what it all comes down to, is that problem solution dynamic. Yeah. Just lighting up and realizing, again, those brain scans from Uri Hassan. It's as simple as that. You ask, no, there's a problem. You pose the problem, and then that lights up the brain. And so exactamundo. Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much for sharing this next installment of knowledge. And as I say, this is a process that we'll probably do it again sooner rather than later. But we're crowdsourcing, building this cumulative knowledge of ABT as we're beginning to realize that people are on their own applying it. And it's fascinating. I think it will feed on itself, because that last episode is the most listened to episode we've had of the podcast. And this probably will be eclipse that one. There's clearly a lot of people out there working on this, and it's giving me a great deal of joy, because this is funded by no foundation, no grants, no nothing. This is pure crowdsourcing, us, everybody in their own initiative, applying this stuff and just gathering practical knowledge. And the stuff that came out in this hour is really fascinating. So that was all great. Everybody, please keep in touch. And that'll do it for today for the ABT Time podcast. And see you all next time. Thanks.